Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this fourth and last session of our STEM Day, Inclusive STEM and Tech for Good here at the Women's Forum Global Meeting. We will now discuss the long-term cost of innovation. Disruptive innovation is a rapidly growing industry with a lot of money in which not enough women are involved. Their lack of representation certainly isn't to the advantage of our economies and societies. So how can we ensure that diverse voices are heard regardless of gender, race, generation, geography, and disability status? How can we make sure no one is excluded and left behind? On our next panel, we welcome Shelley McKinley, Chief Legal Officer at GitHub, Carole Boelitz, Executive Director IP at Lenovo, Shaheena, Janjuha-Jivraj, Associate Professor of HEC Paris, Luc Martens, Research and Operations Manager of ExxonMobil Chemical Europe. And this session is moderated by the bright and savvy Carole. Carole is an investor and an advisor. She supported tech founders in the San Francisco Bay Area, in Singapore, in Southeast Asia, in several domains. Carole coaches technology startups on talent strategy, scaling culture, and building strong leadership teams. Prior to this, she was director at Singapore's Smart Nation and Digital Government Group and the Economic Development Board. She was recognized, listen up, as a Women's Forum Rising Talent, a Business Times Top Woman in STEM, and as an Asia 21 Young Leader. And as always, I encourage you to communicate about this session on your social media using the hashtag WFGM21 and also hashtag Women for Inclusion. And if you have any questions, please post them. And now, dear Carole, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nathalie, and welcome to my very distinguished panelists here. I could spend a day introducing all their accomplishments, but I really want to get to the expertise they have in this topic that I'm not going to exaggerate is a matter of life and death. In some sense, it's a very old topic and that we've known for a long time it is a problem. For example, we've known that airbags design results in women occupants having a 73% greater chance of being seriously injured in a head-on collision. And that with artificial intelligence in voice and facial recognition, some of the impacts here are going to be exacerbated. For example, I was at a self-driving car company last week, and they were saying that, wow, look at who's making these algorithms that are able to identify who's on the road and avoid them. It is a matter of life and death. And we've known this for a long time. At the same time, it's new in that only in recent years has this really gained popular attention. And for all of these distinguished panelists here, I bet we can't help but wonder, is this narrative or is this substantively changing anything? What results in substantive changes really? And I hope that we are going to address this in depth today in our 40 minutes. All right, we're going to talk about pipeline, we're going to talk about system, we're going to talk about measurement. And without further ado, I want to invite each of my panelists here to answer the first question. What is your role in bringing diversity into emerging technology? And give me a positive example where a diverse lens has resulted in good, inclusive innovation. Let's start with Shaheena.
Thanks, Carole, and thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be here. So I think when we talk about emerging tech, we're really still talking about innovation. And to successfully create innovation, you need two things: building diverse teams and creating inclusive cultures. And in my work, I work a lot with organizations to create sustainable and impactful interventions that nurture innovation. And we are still talking about a transformation agenda, we're talking about leadership, and we're talking about culture change. So one of the examples I wanted to share with you, because I do a lot of work globally in terms of policy, but also working with organizations, there is a lot around incubating new ideas, new innovations around systems within organizations, and that's really still where we are, championing women into leadership roles. And for example, recently working with a major bank in the UK, helping them think about their risk and thinking about innovation and risk, but bringing women through the pipeline in order to better address risk and really understand what that means. Performance has increased for them. So these are the sorts of things we know do make a difference and we have to still keep working on.
Thank you so much. How about Shelley?
Sure. Hi, thanks. Really great to be here. I wanted to talk a little bit about developers. GitHub, which is the company that I'm the chief legal officer of, is a developer company. And we strive to be the home for all developers. We have 73 million active users on our platform. And I think, as folks know, developers are building the technology of the future. They're actually building the future. And so that's why it's critical that technology that's being built is being built with inclusion in mind from the ground up. Like anything, it's hard to retrofit. Once you've got something built, think about your house. If you forgot to put the plumbing in, you can't go back and put it in after the house has been constructed. So we need to be very focused on how we start early in the pipeline. And that certainly starts with what you've heard about today in STEM education. But when we get to the actual development, it really does start with developers. And one of the unique things that we're positioned to do as a developer company is to ensure that we foster and grow diverse communities. Kind of one key way to talk about success the way we're doing things is really looking at communities and how we ensure that diverse voices are heard. If you go to GitHub, which is a developer platform for developing software, and just search on women, what you'll find is thousands of open source projects that are focused on promoting female developers and building that sense of community. So it's a key point of diversifying the developer community is really having the community build on itself, just like open source was designed to do in the first place.
And I love that it's also a way to teach women, as Shaheena pointed out. So how about you, Carole?
Yes, thank you for inviting me. I'm very excited to be here. Diversity, has helped me, through my career and always been an interest of mine. But now as the executive director of IP, it is now my job and my responsibility to take ownership of that issue and to take action. And one of the things that Lenovo has done through our IP program is we are not just a founding pledgee of the Diversity and Innovation Pledge, but we were the drafter of it and helped bring in over 30 companies to sign on to this Diversity and Innovation Pledge, which is a pledge to transparency, to daylight of our numbers of diverse inventors in the IP and the patenting process, and to take action on those numbers. And looking at those numbers internally at Lenovo, we're allowed to focus our attention on what I'll call the low-hanging fruit. Where is our issue? Is it in the patent review board? And I can say that at Lenovo, that's not our issue, but it's more of a gateway one, that it has been where we're planning our action is to outreach to female inventors and people of color and diverse inventors to join the patenting process. And so we have created an all-woman inventathon, and we have also partnered with the Lenovo Product Diversity Office to increase that diversity in our IP and innovation, because going back to kind of the theme of this session is the economic repercussions of that. There's patent awards, and then also having patents and innovation on your resume or your CV can also affect your long-term career aspirations and perception as a leader in technology. And so we're here to improve that in any way that we can and take action.
That's wonderful. And what I hear is really this whole ecosystem approach that is not just your company, but beyond, bringing other people on board. It's wonderful. How about you, Luke?
Thanks, Karen, and thanks for the opportunity to participate in today's discussion. I think it's a very timely conversation. I was recently reading an article that highlighted that none of this year's Nobel Prize in STEM subjects were awarded to a woman, and that over the past decades, the total women account for only 3% of science category winners. While much work remains to be done to ensure that women and all who offer diverse voices and perspectives are not left behind as we innovate towards a more sustainable future, progress is being made. And that's shown by a recent report commissioned for the European Parliament that shows that in the EU, There has been a mean annual increase of 2.9% of the number of women employed as scientists and engineers between 2013 and 2017. And I truly hope that that trend is continuing, because I'm a truly believer in the power of diversity. Diversity means diversity of ideas, perspectives, skills, knowledge, cultures. This diversity will enable innovation and help addressing the complex global energy business. Because indeed, few challenges are more important than meeting the world's growing demand for energy and the products and the materials that support modern life, while at the same time reducing environmental impacts, including the risk of climate change. Technology is a key enabler to address this dual challenge, and it's vital that we encourage girls and boys to pursue STEM education to ensure that all voices are being heard when we create a future generation of innovation leaders.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Luke. And I love that analogy that I think Shelley brought up about, I just thought of a house, right? You get the plumbing right, you get the foundations right, and that's where we're going to start in this conversation. The plumbing and the foundations, the pipeline. What is that like? And Shelley, maybe you can start there. Talk about the importance of these developer communities and what has really worked in building inclusive developer communities and also integrating them further upstream, further downstream into the engineering work.
Yeah, so as I talked about in the beginning, creating that community of people that are working on these issues together is really important. When we think about the unique position that I think we have as a company and starting with developers, we're really built on open source, on the foundation of open source. And I think every developer starts by starting with open source. When you start in school or you're just tinkering around, everyone's familiar with this community of development. So that's why it's so important that we think about, if we can really open source development, why can't we open source inclusion in these things? So working with communities and bringing those groups along is really important. I also think there's one critical thing to point out as we think to the future is developer tools themselves are going to, with AI, going to start empowering a more diverse group of developers. So we released recently this tool called Copilot, and it's not perfect yet, for sure. It's still in technical preview, but basically it's a coding assistant. So, that's a very smart one. So you can imagine how quickly you can start bringing in, all kinds of people into the development environment that maybe haven't started off with the same level of education and skill set as other developers. So as we think about working with these communities and sort of upping everyone's game and bringing more people into the fold, these kind of AI-powered tools are going to be incredibly important.
Yeah, so this idea of reducing that barrier to entry to a field that's a little bit intimidating to groups that, yeah, it's great. And Luke, you have this huge passion for mentorship in the R&D community, also very far upstream, but you talked about, Nobel Prize winners, not many being women. Talk to me about mentorship. What has really worked there and what did we think would work but did not?
Okay, well, mentoring is really important to build a pipeline of talent because it provides the young people a tool to feel heard and valued. And when they get inspired and motivated and they work great. And so ExxonMobil, we have several technology sites located in the US, Asia, and in Europe. And as a result, we hire from a very broad range of universities, creating a diverse group of young talents with different skills, masters, PhDs, postdocs, you name it. But there's more. And I want to show this with a small example here. It goes back about 2 decades, end of the 90s. A colleague of mine, a female manager in our technology center in Baytown, Texas, she made the observation that our younger generation of engineers and chemists, beside the technical discussions that we were having about work, they were also very eager to discuss how we work, to better understand the broader picture. What are the career opportunities outside a given reporting line? What are giving them a more holistic view on what it means working for an international company and being successful in an international company. And in response to this, she created the Global Technology Mentoring activity, which had its prime objective to provide a comprehensive overview of the ExxonMobil working environment, facilitate onboarding them, and promote rapid acquisition of the skills. And we've seen a lot of positive outcome of that. For instance, we've seen a much faster assimilation of skills and organizational knowledge, faster transition of the employees. Very important. The mentoring motivates and inspires them, and it decreases job satisfaction. And we've seen an enhanced retention of the employees. Now, having been a mentor myself for 20 years now, I can tell you that this sounding board works two ways. They learn from you, but you also learn from them. For instance, active listening, for instance, leadership style, those discussions, and especially you learn what the needs are and the interests are of the young people by talking to them.
Thanks, Luke. I really like this sense of also reducing barriers to understanding how the broader organization works, which is important for rising in leadership. And it's not something you necessarily learn in the technical side. So thank you for that. And Shaheena, wrap this question up for us. You've studied this issue of pipelining and mentorship and education. Tell us what works in boosting the pipeline of women in emerging technology.
Sure. So one of the things we do know that when you look at the data around women in emerging tech, the data is very mixed, and sometimes there's growth and then it just suddenly pulls back. And even if you've got women going into tech from an educational perspective, they don't necessarily convert into careers. So I'm picking up three big areas that really make a difference. And we know education is all about social change, and this is so very much the case with tech and gender, but it has to be systemic. And actually going back to Shelley's point about foundations, which seems to be a common theme, I'm actually going to start with early childhood before I move into higher education. We know there is so much data now that really talks about the impact of socialized norms and how that influences children between the ages of 0 and 5. And when we think about emerging tech in particular, we still hold lots of stereotypes around what AI looks like, what that means in terms of technology, and how we then present that to children. So what toys are we giving to children? What opportunities do we allow for kids to think about careers and how they role play? And coupled with that, although it's not strictly education, it's really important, it's the presence of female role models. And just even over the last few years, we're seeing some really amazing work being done from companies like Mattel, who have been consistently bringing out Barbie dolls as scientists, as astronauts. We recently had Professor Sarah Gilbert, who's from Oxford University, pioneering by being part of the AstraZeneca vaccine team, having a Barbie doll made of her. And imagine what that means to a child holding it. So the education piece at a very young age, if we get those foundations right, back to the plumbing analogy, the whole pipeline becomes a lot easier. If we then fast track to higher education, we then see there's a lot of good work that's been done in terms of bringing organizations, companies into classrooms, things like Royal Academy of Engineering, bringing new ways of thinking and problem solving, but we still need the more entrepreneurial disruptive companies coming in and working within education. And now almost every country has a very strong entrepreneurship agenda and aligned to universities, to business schools. So again, we're seeing a really strong opportunity because we know for girls and women in particular, tech is a way to solve problems. So we use entrepreneurship, we use tech, we find the problems, and we're able to start harnessing that tech to problem solve.
I love how you just brought us super deep into that house, you know, and as a mother of girls under 5, like that is something that I think about right now. And so we're going to move into the house now. And Carole, you brought up something. You said diversity is a team sport. And this is part of the system that we need to create. It's not just about one group of people championing diversity. So you have worked on boosting diversity in inventorship in Lenovo. What systemic incentives did you put in place for this?
There's a lot of incentives, but a lot of it is opening people up, as Shaheena mentioned, about outreach. You know, this is an opportunity for you to improve your career, to improve your experience, to improve your future opportunities, and to improve your impact at Lenovo. And Lenovo's approach to this is, you know, the research is deep and clear that, you know, diverse teams create more creative solutions. And I mean, I don't want to leave anything on the table. I want diverse teams to be part of my inventorship because I'll get better solutions, more innovative solutions, and that brings more value to Lenovo and more value to our customers. And so part of that has been, as we say, been bringing people into the process through outreach, and then creating a safe place for them to brainstorm and to innovate, to create that comfortable environment for them to do that. And then also highlight and spotlight, as Shaheena said, making sure that we have people out there as the face of Lenovo Inventors, so that someone who's sitting back in their chair says, oh, that person looks like me, I can do that too. And so we've been spotlighting diverse inventors, but also we recently published our most valuable patents of the year. And we highlighted not just the diverse inventors, but we highlighted the diverse teams, because we also want to, incentivize the teams to be inclusive for those creative solutions. And so we celebrate the whole team for being an ally to the diverse inventors, as well as the diverse inventors themselves.
That's wonderful. Celebrating that is a big thing. Who becomes the role model? So Shelley, I want to build off the point you talked about, bringing, these developer communities and engineering teams being diverse, but it's not enough for them to be diverse. Tell me about how you instrument a culture of inclusion where they feel like they can bring that full self there.
Yeah, I think, it really kind of goes to some of the things that that Carole was saying and others around how do you, build that culture by helping people with tools. So you can't just bring in, a diverse set of people and expect everyone to sort of understand how to build and include others. And so, one of the most important things to do is to ensure that you have those role models that we're talking about, and people are building new role models and making sure that that's kind of an exciting and interesting thing for people to do. So one of the things that we've done is looked at how do we create a program? We've got a program that is called All In, and what that does is takes the maintainers of the code project, who would bring in other people and ensure that they get the right level of training around unconscious bias, that we do some assessments on their community health to understand, sort of some causes and instances of non-inclusive dialogue within the community, and help train them on using tools to help address that. Also, accessibility is another thing, that's a key point of diversity that we can do a lot in technology to ensure that everything is accessible for everyone. And then badging, things like giving people a badge to display on their profile if they've taken some kind of training and have shown that they're incorporating inclusive practices in their projects. Access to other incentives and perks. And also, when you think about how you bring a community in, people who are looking to help also promote a diverse and inclusive environment will look for things like what community has other people in the community with badges and training, and will help start bringing people together who are all working on the topic.
Yeah, thank you for that. Just this whole comprehensive instrumentation, right? It's not just one part. I really love that. And Shaheena, in the prep, you talked to me about raising the distinction between a data-informed system rather than a data-driven system. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, so we talk about, we talk about data being the new oil, and really when we think about oil, it's much more valuable when it's processed and refined, and this is very much the case with data as well. So it is incumbent on all of us to become much more sophisticated in how we use and handle data. Even if we think about the D&I agenda, 10 years ago when I started working in this space, it was very much based on somebody's done this well in one organization, let's apply that thinking somewhere else. Now it's much more evidence-based, it's much more data-driven. And, I'm the first person, even though I'm the geeky academic, I'm the first person to say it is not my domain, it's everyone's domain. It's about everyone getting familiar with data and actually taking on a curious approach. So, Karen, you mentioned earlier the impact of seatbelts, not having the data to understand what the consequences are if you're a woman in a car, and that's not factored into the mechanics around the seatbelt. So the questions I often ask people to think about when they look at data is, what's missing, what questions are not being asked, and what assumptions are we making on the back of that? So being data informed is really critical, because let's face it, we're in a very turbulent environment. We need the data to help us spot trends and patterns, but not be wedded to that data that we don't think creatively. And so that's really where the agility kicks in. You're data informed, you spot the patterns, but you're very creative with the solutions. That's the really important piece. And that's back to Shelley's point about building inclusive teams. If everybody has access to the data, diverse teams have access to the data, collectively you build a phenomenal story based on creativity, based on curiosity. And that's where you get really powerful solutions and innovation.
I love that. And now we are at, okay, we have built this house and we you know, it's not going to be perfect. We're going to keep iterating. We're going to collect data and understand where are we missing our blind spots. But I think it's important for us to talk about what actually success is. How do we know that our house will stand? And it's, you know, at the right stage of development right now. And I want to put it on, you know, Luke. I haven't heard from you in a bit. I want to know, what is success in mentorship programs that you feel so strongly about?
Well, that's a very interesting question, and let me try to answer. Let me also allow me to broaden a little bit the scope here, because as I mentioned, we recruit from scientists with different backgrounds. And more than 60% of our professional workforce have a STEM degree. So these disciplines traditionally have presented a lower availability of diverse candidates, which has a direct impact on the overall diversity mix. So to help unlock the full potential of young people, young minds, and improve access to diverse talents, we support a wide range of education programs around the world. An example of this is our long-standing STEM education program called SciTech in Europe, where we have youngsters 6, 14, 18 years old, you know, like we ask them to be engineer for a day. And the hands-on experience and knowing, you know, it opens a whole new world for that. So somebody mentioned role model. Role model is important. Mentoring is another important element. When we have the mentoring activities, and we've got many more mentoring networks like the Women Interest Network, the Women in Technology Network, we do survey them regular basis, and we ask them, is it going well? We survey the mentees and the mentors, and the feedback that we are getting is helping us to improve further the way we work. As a result, I can say proudly that our service years that for engineers and chemists is more than 30 years. Yeah, and then secondly, we're striving to achieve our objective to proportionate diversity in our executive population. Of the past decade, 39% of our global management professional technical hires were female. In 2019, 22% of ExxonMobil executives were women. My president is a woman, compared to 13% in 2009, which is an increase of 69%. Great progress, but we are not there yet. More to do.
Thank you, Luke. And Carole, can you speak? So you alluded to this earlier. You do measure, but there's a lot of challenges around making these public. Tell me about that process of convincing people that it should be public.
Right. Kind of echo what Luke was saying, that looking at those numbers may not be as a positive experience, that we're not yet where we want to be, and revealing that point of where we are can make people feel embarrassed or, you know, risk averse, that what's the public going to say to this? What's the press, you know, headline going to be tomorrow? But going back to Shaheena, taking that data informed decision process of, you know, I'm not going to ignore the data. And I do think we need to be transparent for where we are so that we can show progress and admit that the progress needs to be accelerated, but we can also celebrate the progress that we've made. And so revealing those numbers and those metrics, you have to build in that support with your internal executives to get them comfortable with that and get them comfortable with the risk. But also that was one of the reasons why we partnered in founding the pledge for the diversity and innovation is, how do I say it? There's building out that everybody is in the same bucket, but we can all learn together. We can all prototype and try different solutions and share them amongst ourselves about what works, but even more so what didn't work. And so that we can accelerate, you know, that change going forward. And building out that transparency and the support behind that can be challenging with your executive leadership. I think is an opportunity to excel as opposed to an opportunity of risk. One other thing is you do have to be compliant, with privacy laws and expectations, and there's other challenges, but none of them are insurmountable. I think that having that awareness and that thoughtful approach, but then being transparent and putting daylight on the problem allows us to take action going forward.
That idea of peer commitments and creating a peer group, we're not the only ones really, like, look, all of us are working on this. I think that's one of the reasons we are even in this conversation too, all of us here. So I do want to ask Shelley now about this issue of measurement and intersectionality. So we know that it's not just about women. There are huge intersections with race, ability, disability, different things here. And sometimes when you focus only on women, we actually end up, letting other groups slide. So tell me, why is it important to address the seeming infinite number of dimensions, and how? Give us some advice, Shelley.
Yeah, so I think this is an issue that's been highlighted over. It's quite a recent issue. It's been highlighted over the last few years. The issue's always been there. We just didn't really, I think, appreciate it in the way that we know we now need to. And that's one of the challenges when you think about a sort of data-driven culture. Is it's always important to continue to test your assumptions about the data, because if you measure women only, then you can end up hitting your targets and having only, for example, white women in a role. If you're only measuring these individual attributes, and what we know is that people aren't one individual attribute. They are made up by a number of attributes. So we need to really press to be measuring populations beyond just single identities or groups, because that is the only way we can understand, how specific lived experiences are resulting in, issues that we need to address. So if we can take stock of these number of dimensions and their lived experiences, we can create and explore new policy approaches that will address growing inequities that we're seeing around the globe and that are really heightened among these intersectional populations. So it's a big focus for the future. It's something that we're starting to see a lot of academic research on, and I think that we need to, as we make further commitments going forward, I think we need to start really thinking about how do we commit to addressing more intersectional issues than just really kind of one-dimensional issues that have been the focus for so long.
Shaheena, I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on this from the academic, data-driven perspective too.
Sure. So, I mean, when you think about intersectionality, it's been a field of research for quite a long time, and often with these things, they're bubbling away in the background, and then it erupts in the field of business. And I think it's always the challenge between taking what's so steeped in theory and actually pulling out the key areas that are really relevant and useful within the business environment. So I think certainly what's happening now, the narrative is really starting to shift and change, because there has to be the application. And again, it almost comes back to this thing about bridging the gap between the theoretical perspective and what this really means as a lived experience. And that then feeds back into the academic environment. And to be honest, I think we've seen a lot of this in the gender space, and one of the reasons why I think gender diversity is up there, it's 50% of the population is female, so there's a very logical reason why we focused on that. But the research has been there for a very long time, and it's underpinned the behaviour. So I think as we move more activity within intersectionality, we'll really start to push that along. But, and this is one of the big challenges, even if we think about race and ethnicity, just the mere way in which we define it, we understand it, and to have clear definitions that provide robustness in the research also makes that quite challenging. So for me, there's a very practical view about sometimes getting past the definitions just to get things moving, so we actually have more constructive conversations.
That is a conversation we could have for the next 20 hours.
Absolutely.
We are coming up on time, and I have actually 5 more minutes left, and I want to do a lightning round, and we have more time than I thought. So 1 minute each. People here sitting in this room interested in this issue, give parting advice on how do you boost this pipeline of women and minorities in emerging technology so that we can have inclusive outcomes that we all deserve. Let's start with Carole.
It's hard to go first on this. It's such a broad opportunity, but that's just it. I think I want people to take the opportunity, take accountability, and take action. You know, whether it is one person, you look around the room and see that we don't have a diverse team addressing a solution, invite more people. Say, hey, don't we want the most creative and valuable solution? Let's invite, you know, other cultures, other genders, other people into this solution to make sure that we have the most valuable and creative solution that addresses our customers or our need. And so that to me is my baseline advice. Take action on a small scale. I know that in my career, the things that have helped me have not been large global problems, and I know that they're valuable and useful for thousands of people. But for me, it has been the small statement from a colonel when I was in the military saying, no, Carole is not going to go get coffee. She deserves a seat at the table. And here I was, a 22-year-old graduate, going, right, I need to sit at the table. That's my role. That's my responsibility. And I still have to say 40 years later that, you know, that is one of the most impactful events of my life. So be an ally, be a voice, take action.
And you have been an ally to many. What's your parting advice here?
Well, you know, my input on this one is I want to use my mantra. And my mantra is something that I got from my own mentor, sorry. And that's innovations happen when people interact. If you want to work a complex problem, you do that within your silo, it won't work. You will not get out of the box solutions. That solution would only come if you work it with a diverse team. And that's exactly what we need to do in R&D. We need to bring together people with different skills, different background, different perspectives. And that links directly with the importance to encourage more girls and boys to pursue STEM education, because they are the innovators of the future. They will use their acquired skills to shape a more equal society where all voices will be heard and innovation will actually happen. I want to thank you again for the opportunity to join the debate today.
Thank you, Liu. And Shaheena.
So again, completely in agreement with what Luke and Carole have said, and this is something we discuss in my latest book, Future Proof Your Career. I think we need to really drill down and recognize leaders working on projects around emerging tech need to recognize that women may not necessarily put themselves forward for projects. And we actually talk about a specific example in creating a virtual assistant in a hospital where the surgeons, the anaesthetists, the consultants all came forward, but the nurses, the administrators, the pastoral care, predominantly female roles, were not there. And think about what that means when you have a virtual assistant being developed for a child. And sometimes there's an assumption women are ambivalent about this, but actually it's about, we know some of it's still about confidence, and we have to really recognize that hesitation and push it and actually force women to have a voice at the table, because without this, the problems we've seen, the biases we've seen around solutions will keep happening. So it is pushing and pushing until these voices become normalized. The other area we also need to think about is increasingly recognizing the intersection between emerging tech and behaviors and things like ethics. We haven't even talked about ethics, but such a big area, and that's where we'll start to see more diversity of thinking coming in and actually attracting more people who really want to ensure that this space becomes more accessible to everyone as well.
Right, and making sure those voices have power compared to, say, people making it the engineers. So how that's another dimension, right?
Absolutely.
So, Shelley, I would love to invite you for final thoughts.
Yeah, just to, certainly everyone has said great things that I agree with. I will add one thing to the mix quickly, which is, I can't see the room in front of me today, but I know that there are a lot of very senior, very capable, very huge leaders in society. And I think it's just incumbent upon all of us to ensure that we are opening the door wider than we found it. So whether that's mentoring, sponsoring, whatever it is you do in your daily life and however you can do it, I would say just keep focusing on opening that door wider than you found it.
Thank you so much to my distinguished panelists, and I think we've built this house, right, together from the deep foundations of education, further up to developer communities, to what happens in the workplace, from instrumentation, lowering barriers to understanding the organization, lowering barriers to coding, and all the way up to measurement and intersectionality, and the fact that let's not get hung up on definitions. Let's move in the spirit of inclusiveness here. Let's take the small step. So this has been an amazing opportunity to speak to all of you and a true honor. So thank you very much, panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, wow, what a fantastic afternoon. A big thank you to the panelists of our last session and our last moderator. I hope you all enjoyed the insights shared by our excellent, stellar speakers and moderators. The theme of this year's gathering is Her and Now, Uniting Purpose and Power for Equality. And we've heard lots of great takeaways, such as we need to make girls feel like they can do anything. A can-do attitude isn't enough. We need to invest in girls from a young age on, and we need to move mentorship a step up to advocacy. In order for learning to be equitable, we need to redesign learning. Then I've heard a big challenge for the future is how we can touch young people everywhere. It is important to give women a voice and to value it. AI is only as good as it is programmed. We need to create cultures of inclusion based on data-informed processes, and that is possible especially through diverse teams. We need to take action even on a small scale. We need to be allies. We need to have a voice. So these are only a few notes that I took during this afternoon. A big thank you to all the speakers and moderators for having taken the time today to participate. And I don't doubt for a second that your insights helped to generate new ideas and to point to the main challenges in STEM that will be useful to all those listening today. We are here working on building an inclusive future, and it is not over. Tomorrow's session is about equal access to health. So have a great Women's Forum Global meeting. Enjoy the upcoming sessions. All the best from Luxembourg, and I'm also looking forward to meeting you in person in Paris on Friday. Stay happy, stay safe.